On a beautiful day, marine biologist Tom and his family, including his wife Julia and their 2 children, Cassie and Ben, set out on a cruise aboard their yacht in the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben were engrossed in fishing, Cassie was absorbed in her electronics, and Julia was leisurely swimming in the clear blue water. Suddenly a strange feeling crept over her, filling her with unease. Even though the sea remained calm, Julia couldn't shake the rising fear, as if something huge and dangerous was lurking nearby. At the same time, the yacht's equipment began to act erratically, but Tom remained oblivious, too focused on his fishing pole. And meanwhile, Julia's condition was deteriorating, and she began to sink further into the water. She screamed for help, but no one in her family heard her. The current seemed to change, pulling her away from the yacht. As the situation became critical, Tom finally heard his wife's cries. He quickly rushed to the helm, steering the yacht toward Julia, who was being swept away. Tom immediately jumped into the water, and with the help of his children, they pulled Julia back onto the boat and performed first aid to save her. Although they managed to rescue his wife in time, Tom was incredibly angry because he had always reminded everyone to notify him before going into the water to avoid dangerous situations like this. Julia apologized, and the incident was quickly resolved. The whole family had a reason to celebrate because today was Ben's 13th birthday. Tom lit the candles on the cake, and the family gathered to wish Ben well as he happily accepted his gifts. Meanwhile, Cassie was taking family photos, capturing the joyful moment. Just then, Cassie's boyfriend called to check in about the swim, but suddenly, a massive storm appeared on the horizon. Cassie grew anxious, but her boyfriend reassured her that he was safe. Then the call abruptly dropped. Cassie hurried to tell her parents about the storm approaching the shore, and soon after, the entire family felt powerful tremors hitting unexpectedly. On the deck of the boat, the whole family saw giant whale carcasses floating around the yacht. Tom explained that sometimes whales lose their way during a storm, but this time, the animals were colliding with and pushing the yacht, putting them in danger. Determined to find out what was happening, Tom dove into the water. However, when he returned to the boat, he was injured from hitting the propeller. Julia quickly stitched up the wound on her husband's shoulder. Tom explained that the yacht's shaft might have been bent, possibly from the impact with the whale's tail, and now they couldn't continue out to sea. Cassie tried to restore communication, but found no signal, and even the radio was silent. Tom began checking their supplies and realized they only had enough water for about 4 days. Although they were on a shipping route, which meant a ship might find them, a series of strange noises from outside made the entire family anxious. When they stepped out onto the deck, they witnessed glowing objects falling from the sky, getting closer and closer. Recognizing the dangerous situation, Tom decided to take the risk, started the engine, and tried to steer the yacht away from the approaching meteors. Finally, the engine stopped working, and the next object fell very close, allowing the family to realize that these were artificial satellites from Earth. A strong wind began to blow fiercely, causing chaos among the equipment on the yacht. Terrified, the entire family hurried inside. As the ship was battered by the raging waves, they put on life jackets and braced themselves for the worst. In the midst of the panic, a strange bell rang out, leaving Tom feeling dazed. He tried to fire a flare for help, but no one responded. The family was left to cling on for survival through the night. By morning, they breathed a sigh of relief when they realized they were still alive. However, there was a large hole in the side of the yacht, and the whole family was astonished, not understanding why the ship was still afloat. When they stepped outside, the sight before them left them speechless. The seawater had receded, and their yacht was stranded on a rock in the middle of a dry desert where there had once been a vast ocean. After a moment, Tom tried to reassure everyone, affirming that not all hope was lost. When he checked the compass, he noticed that the needle pointed north, but not in the direction it should have been. This indicated that the Earth's poles had shifted. Tom explained that this phenomenon had occurred in history, but a long time ago. Perhaps the sea had withdrawn, and this area was now land. A horrifying thought flashed through their minds: humanity might have been wiped out. Cassie couldn't bear the terrible truth and ran into the cabin, asking to be left alone. Julia took the opportunity to inventory the remaining supplies, while Ben released bright clusters of balloons into the sky, hoping that any survivors would spot them and come to their rescue. Tom patiently signaled for help over the radio. Suddenly, he received a response from Nato, the captain of a small submarine. Nato explained that they had been deep underwater when the disaster struck, which was why they had managed to survive. However, all other communication systems were down, and hoping for outside assistance was futile. According to Nato's calculations, the sea would return within a week and it would be fierce. He advised them to quickly find higher ground for shelter and to stay there until the situation stabilized. Julia ordered the kids to pack their things. Tom, worried, directly asked Captain Nato if he could save his children. Nato sadly explained that his submarine walks story small, and unfortunately, his companion had died, leaving only enough room for one more person. After some convincing, Tom persuaded Nato to agree to take both children and provide their coordinates. Tom immediately plotted a route on the nautical map, promising to reach the rendezvous point in the coming days. The next morning, the family got ready for their journey. As Tom stepped onto the deck, he was surprised to see a man approaching with a dog. Tom walked over to the man and greeted him, but he quickly realized the man was injured. He hurriedly offered the traveler some water. After drinking, the man suddenly punched Tom hard in the face. Julia saw this and rushed to her husband in horror as the traveler pointed a makeshift handgun at Tom's chest. The dog held Julia back, freezing her in fear as she realized there was no way to save her husband. Julia turned and ran toward the yacht, but the man chased after her and stabbed her in the arm, and the children immediately ran to help their mother. Then Julia had Cassie and Ben in the storage closet, giving her daughter the flare gun and teaching her how to use it for protection. The intruder was trying to break down the door, and he finally succeeded. Julia hurriedly hid in the bathroom to tend to her wound. The intruder walked straight into the kitchen and began to rummage through the place. Clearly very hungry, he took a can of food and continued to search the yacht. Meanwhile, Julia quickly armed herself with a kitchen knife. When the intruder entered the cabin, she jumped into the water and concealed herself beneath the yacht. He peered through the opening but couldn't spot her. However, the dog suddenly attacked Julia, forcing her to kill it in self-defense. The yelp startled the man, causing him to step outside and discover the dog's body. Julia climbed back onto the yacht through the opposite side, but unfortunately she fell right into the killer's hand. He hit her and threw her onto the couch, tightening his grip around her neck. Cassie witnessed everything, realizing that this was the most dangerous situation yet. Determined to save her mother, she opened the cabinet and shot at the man. The bullet pushed him aside, but the flames from the explosion erupted, engulfing the yacht in fire. Julia immediately ordered the kids to run for their lives. As Julia stealthily entered the galley, the killer, despite his injuries, attempted to attack her once more. Julia quickly kicked him away, grabbed the packed bags and jumped into the sea. There, Ben painfully discovered his father's lifeless body. As he rushed to the corpse and sobbed uncontrollably, Julia kissed her deceased husband, but when she saw the killer leave from the burning yacht, she knew they had no time to lose. Without hesitation, she led her children away from the exploding boat, leaving it to burst behind them. The family ran across the rocky desert and quickly found refuge in a rocky canyon, where a stream flowed through. However, the water there was salty and undrinkable. Cassie shared some water with her brother, trying to keep their spirits up in the midst of their despair. The boy refused to drink the water, feeling guilty for thinking the killer had come here because of him when he saw the balloons. Cassie shared this concern, but Julia immediately told her to stop and focus on protecting her younger brother. She explained that the killer did not intend to harm them and instructed the children to gather, preparing for a long journey ahead. However, Julia realized that the killer was still silently tracking their trail. The family hurriedly continued to move through the night. By evening, Ben discovered a hammerhead shark carcass and tried to butcher it, but Julia spotted the pursuer appearing nearby and immediately ordered the children to run. They quickly passed through a field filled with containers of toxic waste that had once been submerged. Despite being aware of the pollution risk, Julia urged the children to move forward because she knew the killer was still following them. The family traveled along the former ocean floor, avoiding piles of plastic and debris discarded by humans. Julia soon noticed that Ben was severely dehydrated, and she reluctantly gave him the last drops of water she had. Cassie felt despondent, believing they had no chance of survival, but Julia firmly ordered them to keep moving. Eventually, they came across the wreckage of a long-lost airplane on the ocean floor and decided to crawl inside to rest. Julia flipped over the last family photo and recalled the first time she met Tom at the hospital, where he was being treated for decompression sickness after a failed dive. The children couldn't hold back their tears as they remembered their father, offering him their final goodbyes. At night, Cassie was awakened by a strange noise. She stepped outside and sat near the plane in the darkness. The killer approached her, unaware that she was a decoy in Julia's plan. Just then, Julia emerged from the shadows, ambushing him and stabbing the man with a knife. At dawn, the family prepared to continue their journey, but they quickly discovered the body of the killer, whose remains had been rummaged through, a sign that something more dangerous than a human was lurking in the desert. Suddenly, Ben rushed ahead. His mother shouted for him to stop, but the boy didn't listen and ran straight toward a puddle of salt water, trying to drink a few gulps. Julia quickly pulled him back, but he soon began to feel sick. Along the way, they came across some plastic chairs and decided to build a temporary shelter to escape the sun, resting inside. Suddenly, Julia heard strange noises and stepped outside, immediately spotting something that compelled her to wake the kids. Realizing the danger was approaching, they began to run. Before long, they saw a large ship in the distance, surrounded by fallen containers and a few people wandering about. Julia called out to them, but they only saw thousands of giant crabs rushing into a container, which they promptly locked, ignoring her cries for help. In the midst of the panic, the three of them climbed onto another container. Although the crabs injured Julia's leg, she, along with Cassie and Ben, sat on top, witnessing the crabs squeezing through the door crack and attacking the people inside. Despite everyone's efforts to fight back, Julia had to wrap a cloth around her injured leg and passed out. By the next morning, when she woke up, she felt disoriented and scared, calling out for the kids but only receiving silence in return. It turned out the crabs had moved on, and the children had gone down to search for food and weapons. Julia quickly cauterized her wound while Ben rummaged through the containers, checking for usable weapons. They found some food and water in the bag of one of the deceased. In the meantime, Julia discovered a radio and immediately contacted Nato. He replied, explaining that he had also been attacked by deep-sea arthropods. Based on his observations, he believed the sea would soon return, which was why those creatures had appeared. Julia pleaded with him to save her two children, but she was unsure where to go since she had lost the map. Nato fired a flare, and Ben pointed out the direction for the family. They quickly headed toward it, and not long after, a yellow submarine appeared in the distance. However, approaching it was difficult due to the former seabed terrain. Cassie felt uneasy hearing her mother talk about rescuing the children. However, Julia refused to answer and urged her family to continue. They had to navigate through a gorge contaminated by toxic waste. At one point, they were caught in a rock slide, separating Julia from the children. She ordered them to keep moving, but when Cassie refused, Julia pleaded with her daughter to save her brother. Cassie and Ben escaped the gorge and reached the submarine, but there was no one inside. Suddenly, Nato, severely injured, appeared from behind the vessel. He admitted that he had no chance of survival and ordered the children to climb aboard. But Cassie turned back to look for her mother, who was fighting off the rising crabs while the bullets in her gun were nearly exhausted. Cassie climbed up the stone barricade, reaching out to her mother. They reached the submarine just as the crabs surged in, the dead trapped in their claws. The family quickly climbed aboard, just as a wave surged high. The rolling water lifted the submarine and carried it over sharp rocks. As Julia reflected on everything that had happened in the past few days, a vivid image flashed in her mind, and she fainted. When she woke up, she found that the vessel had come to a stop. Julia opened the hatch, and the family stepped out, realizing they were standing in the midst of a ruined city, swept away by the waves. Although the setting was magnificent, the film left little impression, largely due to the mistakes of those who created it.